In this video, we have a race, the dove picks a fight, Tips goes stalking, Ginger tries an apple. Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm currently hiding in the observatory because it's absolutely freezing outside, and this is the beginning of Watching the Wood in December, week 4. It's really cold out there and really windy. Don't know if you can see out there. I've got one of my telescopes set up, looking out the door to near where the pond is, and I'm hoping to catch some pictures of the birds from in the warmth of the observatory. So if I've got any decent pictures, I might stick those into this video. Otherwise, we'll move straight on to Watching the Wood in December, week 4. The 20 seconds began with a female blackbird chasing off a coal tit. That was followed soon after by a male blackbird coming for a drink. A few minutes later, the female was back. While downloading the camera and topping up the bird food, a bluetit came to visit, which I caught on my mobile phone. Late afternoon, the bluetit was back, and a female blackbird wasn't happy about sharing her space with the dunnock. She chased him off, then spent a few minutes eating and drinking. That was it for the 22nd. At midnight, Speedy appeared by the pond. He's so fast that he's often heading away from the camera by the time the motion sensor triggers. All was quiet for the next 90 minutes until a rabbit turned up. I wasn't sure which rabbit it was until it turned around, revealing the nose mark, confirming that it was Jellybean. I think this rabbit's wascally because I can't see the dark mark on his nose. "45 minutes later, at 3 in the morning, Ginger was in the wood looking for seed. The visit lasted a few minutes. The next capture looked like a minute of nothing, until I noticed 2 slugs having a very, very slow race. There were no other captures until lunch, starting with a female blackbird. A great tit followed, stopping at the pond for a drink. Shortly after, it was joined by a bluetit. After the bluetit left, the great tit stayed for a wash. A magpie made a brief visit a few minutes later, ending the lunchtime captures. Speedy the mouse was back again at 10:30 that evening. He made multiple visits for the birdseed that I'd left out. It looks like he was collecting the seed rather than eating it straight away, so I'm guessing he's taken it back to his nest. Latte the cat came from the bottom of the wood 15 minutes after Speedy left, but was then lost from view behind the olive tree. It was dawn before the camera caught anything else. A dunnock followed by a blackbird which chased it off. A robin was next, still in the pre-dawn light. The robin was then chased away by the blackbird. The blackbird was finally left alone just after 8 a.m. By 8:25 it was light enough for the camera to switch to starlight mode, catching a magpie in colour. It was joined by another shortly after. I think the first magpie is the one with the limp that I've noticed around the wood before. The camera turned off until 11:30, when a dove that looked like it had been in a fight triggered it. 20 minutes later, a female blackbird dropped in by the pool, and a robin next to the cyclamen. After the blackbird moved off, the robin moved to the seed pile by the pond. At 12:15, I found out just how aggressive doves can be, picking on a larger magpie and chasing it off. A coal tit landed just before 1 p.m, but was scared off by a pigeon. Shortly after, the pigeon had gone, and a dunnock turned up along with a robin by the pond. As you can see, the other camera is out, but I think the birds need to fill a larger part of the screen before the motion trigger operates. As a result, it missed or didn't trigger for many of the birds that came to the pond. A coal tit made a flying visit at 1:07, grabbing some seed. The robin returned within seconds of the coal tit leaving. Around 2 hours later, a bluetit came for a drink, but was chased off by a female blackbird who stayed for a wash. That was it for the afternoon. At 7 p.m, a black and white cat visited, one of 3 that come here. For a while, I confused this cat for Tips, but realised they are different. I was going to call this one Face Mask due to the white patch, but Wifey didn't like that, so we went with Bandit instead. It was all quiet until 10:40, when Speedy turned up. I initially thought the camera had frozen, as he sat still for ages compared to normal. I don't know if he was listening for danger or whether something else grabbed his attention. He only made a couple of visits, and was the last visitor that evening. Dawn on Christmas Day began in the wood at 7:56, when the camera caught a blackbird by the pond and also a robin in the lower right-hand side of the screen. The blackbird chased the robin away and then returned to the pond for a drink. A magpie was next, just before 1:30 p.m. He made 2 visits, appearing to be scared away on both occasions. A robin arrived next to the juniper bush at 13:46, eating a number of the scattered food pellets that were lying around the stepping stones. He was there for almost a minute, and is shown here 3 clips taken from that time. At 2:10, the camera caught 2 doves, one of which looked like it had been in a fight. A coal tit dropped in for a drink at the same time. While the doves were after the seed, a bluetit landed at the juniper. A quick food grab and it was gone. A behaviour I hadn't seen before was the dove stretching its wings and tail like it had sore muscles. An hour later, I think it is a pigeon that was seen chasing a dove, and that was the last action for the 25th. Speedy was the first visitor for Boxing Day, just before 3:40 in the morning. Latte came through around 25 minutes later. I don't know if he could smell Speedy, but he appeared to be stalking something. He sat there by the tree for around half a minute before moving on towards the hole in the ground that may be where the mice hide. At 5:15, on the morning of the 26th, Ginger came into the wood searching for food, starting by the juniper bush. All that was available was some birdseed left around the stepping stones. I still find it quite hard to identify the foxes, especially if I don't get a good look at the head or the foreleg view. This can be even more challenging if the fox's fur is wet and shows up looking different on the infrared video. Ginger hung around the wood till 5:20 before leaving the wood and heading for the lawn. At 8:10, one of the magpies was dunking food pellets into the pond to soften them before eating. It was joined by a second magpie soon after. Neither one appeared to be the one with the limp, first seen in the 3rd week of December. Half an hour later, the dove with the ruffled feathers was back by the pond. I don't know if this is the same dove, as it did look less scruffy. At 9:30, the female blackbird arrived from the lawn before chasing a dunnock. The dunnock held its ground, and stayed by the stepping stones for the birdseed. A minute later, a bird arrived at the pond, which I think is a female greenfinch. It was chased away by the female blackbird. She really does have an attitude problem. Everything was quiet again until just before 1 p.m, when the robin turned up at the pond. The pigeon wasn't far away. About 15 minutes later, a dunnock was picking up food from around the stepping stones. At 1:48, the dove with the tidy feathers was at the pond for a drink. By 4:13 in the afternoon, the light had faded enough for the camera to switch back to infrared, catching a male blackbird at the pond. At 8:42, Bandit came to the pond, had a brief sniff and moved on down the wood. Half an hour later, Tips, the second black and white cat, headed the other way, appearing to be stalking something. He was looking in the direction of the hole in the woodland floor, so perhaps he was on a mouse hunt. Tips was the last capture of the 26th. The female blackbird was back by the pond at 8:10, quickly dashing under the juniper. A dunnock was next, around 30 seconds later, eating the seed around the stepping stones. By 8:45, the camera was in colour starlight mode. The yellow circle shows the location of what might be the mouse hideout. The male blackbird was by the pond for a drink just before 9 a.m. 50 minutes later, it was a dove at the pond for a drink. By 2:10 in the afternoon, the shaggy-looking dove was at the pond. Perhaps his luck was due to a fight. Ginger was the first evening visitor, in the last hour of the day. He was sniffing around, I think searching for peanuts. He is quite comfortable here now, happy to sit or lie down in the wood in a fairly relaxed state. After a while eating the seed, he spotted some quartered apples and had a go at one of those. Food must be quite hard to find right now in winter time. I've worked out that the infrared LEDs on the camera create a lot of heat, so after several captures in a row, the temperature sensor read abnormally high. It wasn't actually 24 degrees near midnight at the end of December. After the apple, he returned to the seed. All was quiet on the 28th until 6:40 a.m, when Speedy turned up from the direction where I suspect the nest is. He made multiple visits to the seed piles over the next 35 minutes. Blackbird started the dawn captures at 8:10, with both the male and the female by the pond. 40 minutes later, it was a pair of magpies. 5 minutes after that, it was a dove and a dunnock around the pond. Everyone turned up at once at 11:30, and there was a dove, pigeon, magpies, coulted, and dunnock. The magpies were freaked out by the dove again. 6 minutes later, the dove was chasing the blackbird away. They really do have a chip on their shoulder. After the chase, the blackbird made it back to the pond to have a bath. All the splashing shows why I have to top the pond up almost every day. When the blackbird left, a tree sparrow turned up for a drink at the pond. Within a few minutes, 2 more tree sparrows arrived. All 3 started on the birdseed. Not wanting to miss out, a chaffinch appeared from behind the olive tree and began to eat the spilled seed from the hanging feeder. Just before noon, while the dove was eating, A cool-tit dropped down by the pond for a quick drink from the shallow, gravel-filled end. While the shaggy-looking dove was still there, a robin arrived for a wash, and the chaffinch was still searching the woodland floor in the background. A second tree sparrow arrived at the pond, then the robin, and a third tree sparrow joined in with the pool party. Doves seemed to have a problem with everyone, even each other. The chaffinch was at the edge of the wood at 12:40 and made his way to the pond before heading under the juniper. The second camera caught the pigeon at 1:30 by the pool. A few minutes later it was triggered by Bluetits that came for a drink. I was out in the garden again at 4 p.m. to collect a second camera and caught a blackbird on my phone. I managed to move down the wood without scaring it off and got it again by the pond. The Trailcam also got the blackbird after I left, and there were no more captures that night. Ginger came into the wood from the lawn at 1:52 on the morning of the 29th. I left several piles of seed around, and he virtually cleaned up one pile by the olive tree. He stopped part of the way through the third pile, and that's where the camera cut off. Chevron the cat appeared at 3:40 and stopped for a drink. After a little while drinking, he moved off towards the lawn. The blackbird was at the pond as usual, around 8:10. It was half an hour before a great tit and dove were seen. Both spent some time there without the dove getting aggressive. Like Joy from Friends, I guess it doesn't share food. By 8:50, there was a robin, dove and blackbird in view. A couple of minutes later, a bluetit turned up, but didn't stay long. Camera 2 caught the male blackbird at the pond just after 11 a.m. About 10 minutes later, the dove turned up at the pond. Camera 2 caught nothing else until just after 2 p.m, when the scruffy-looking dove arrived. Nothing else was seen until 4 p.m, when the Trailcam had switched to night mode and spotted the blackbird. A soggy-looking ginger turned up at 8:20. He had a brief sniff around the woodland floor and then moved on down the wood. He was the last capture of the 29th. Speedy was seen running up the wood at 1:16 and returning shortly after. There wasn't much seed left on the stepping stones, but enough for a mouse. Speedy was back again briefly at 3:40, then after several hours was back again at 8:20. The dove was the first daylight visitor of the 30th. A few minutes later, there was a dunnock at the front edge of the juniper bush. There was another dunnock by the cyclamen half an hour later. It was 90 minutes before the next visitor, a female blackbird at the pond. The blackbird was back 15 minutes later, at the base of the thorny olive tree, followed shortly after by a dunnock. It had been raining that morning, with one drop sitting right over the camera lens, so the next few captures had to be cropped trying to avoid the rain spot. One capture was a robin playing hide and seek behind the olive tree. I can't remember whether I cleaned the lens or if the water just evaporated, but by almost midnight, when Ginger turned up, I had a clear view again. The temperature was -3 degrees, and Ginger's whiskers were frozen, can be seen reflecting the infrared LEDs. Ginger hung around until just after midnight, as we ended the last day of 2025. Around 7 hours later, Speedy turned up from the top end of the wood. There was still plenty of seed left, as there hadn't been so many visitors during the sub-zero temperatures. Speedy made several visits, but appeared to be stopping for food longer and eating at the seed piles rather than carrying food back home. By 7:38, the birds were starting to appear, with the camera catching Speedy and a robin. The presence of the robin spooked Speedy, and he had second thoughts about the seed piles. By 10:08, Speedy was back at the pond, under the edge of the juniper, but quickly vanished when a blackbird showed up. There was a brief blackbird altercation below the olive tree just before 8 a.m. It was started by the male bird, but there was soon retaliation by the female. There seemed to be an uneasy standoff, but eventually the female moved on. The male blackbird hung around for some time and was joined by a dunnock in the first colour capture of the morning. By 8:24, the magpies turned up. Then 5 minutes later, the scruffy dove and a dunnock had appeared. A robin was also searching the woodland floor by the olive tree. Around the same time, the scruffy dove and a tree sparrow were eating the seed by the pond. They spent some time there and were joined by a robin. It was another 15 minutes before the magpie was back, cleaning up some of the remaining seed. As the weather has got colder, there's been less action overnight and more visits by the birds. As a result, I found I was increasing the daytime operation of the camera to keep the number of captures up. This has resulted in a lot more bird action recently, but has also drained the batteries on the camera and the solar panel, giving me only a week before I needed to recharge both. The cold temperatures also haven't helped the battery performance either. At 10:38, a bluetit dropped in at the pond. By 10:45, the female blackbird came for a quiet bath. The dove and dunnock were nearby. The peace was broken by a second dove arriving and chasing off the first. The blackbird was having a good splash as the dove returned, and I needed to top up the pond again. Around 11 a.m, I went to download the camera and caught the robin on my mobile phone. As it flew off, it almost flew into me. I caught it again briefly under the juniper, but it was too cold to stay out long. The dove and coal-tit were at the pond 20 minutes before midday. Shortly after, a blackbird and pigeon joined the dove, disturbing a bluetit which landed on the edge of the frame. By noon, it was just the pigeon and robin. Around 1:10, a bluetit dropped in next to the pond, trying to crack open a peanut. Failing with that, he took a food pellet instead. At 2:43, it was a great tit that came to feed. A little over half an hour passed before a tree sparrow came for seed. Around 4:30, I went out to put some more seed out, and got this robin on my phone in the dim light of dusk. All went quiet again until 8:23 on New Year's Eve, when Speedy dashed into view to grab some seed. He was back again 6 minutes later, underneath the cornelian cherry tree. Speedy was back once more at 9:14, I think taking food back to his nest. The very last capture of 2025 was Tips the cat, seen heading up the wood at 10:10, then heading out through the laurel hedge. That ended my first year of Trailcam action in Pinetree Wood.
Thanks for watching, do consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.